Hello everyone, we're Team 4 and we will be presenting our Phase 2 design review on the aXcess ergonomic implant. I'm Sam Hines and I'm the project manager.
I'm Kaylee Perron and I'm product development.
My name is Jacqueline Claveau and I'm the technical lead.
I'm Justin Korn and I'm quality.
I'm Erin Heinley and I'm manufacturing.
So first, just give a little bit of background on our design review that we're going to be having today. It's February 5th. Our project number is 001. As I said previously, our project name is the aXcess ergonomic implant port, and the phase under review today is phase 2. So some basic info about our device. The clinical application of an implant port is to provide vascular access in the subclavian to either administer IV medications and fluids, provide drug delivery, especially in cases like chemotherapy, and to allow for easy blood access. Our device design is a rounded equilateral triangular base with a funnel-shaped interior, a low profile of 8 millimeters, and 4 suture holes. It's going to be used in conjunction with a 6 French polyurethane catheter affixed with a custom plastic fastener, and a rubber septum with a 15 millimeter diameter and a 1 millimeter thickness that has palpation bumps on the surface.
So just for a little bit of visual aid, here's the drawing of the full assembly of our product. You can see in the bottom at the triangular base, which we've made out of titanium, would be a custom milled part. It's contoured such that it's smooth and adramatic and has the 4 suture holes, 2 abutting the catheter in order to be secured to the muscle. A rubber septum would fit in the circular hole at the top, and underneath you can see in the section view that there's an angular chamber so that the gauge needle that's placed inside can be funneled towards the catheter so that the drug can be administered more effectively.
So during our phase 2 review today, we're going to be reviewing the status of the action items from our last design review, which covered phase 1. We're going to review the deliverables as specified for phase 2 to ensure that our design is able to meet the requirements and specifications. We're going to review the quality plan for responsibilities as well as the design and project plans. We're going to be reviewing any potential changes in the scope as well as the status of the DHF and any additional issues that need to be brought up. So first we're going to be looking at the status of action items from the last design review phase 1.
So just to walk you through our brainstorming process, every team member looked at competitive products to identify the benefits of the device and help inform our design. We ranked our 4 valves, with schedule being the most important, followed by technical, NRE, and cost. For voting on the final design choice, we chose to go with separate elements of the design and combine the best choices for a comprehensive final design. We chose this route because many of the components performance were independent of one another. If we ran into accessibility or compatibility issues with our selections, we would consider alternative designs. And we also made decisions on elements like palpation bumps, tapered funnel, septum diameter, and other specifications that weren't explicitly outlined but would enhance the performance.
So after deciding on the final design of the implant port, the team created a design input output matrix that includes the specifications to the implant port. Some requirements were given to the team, such as the device needs to withstand 50 psi and have a shelf life of 6 months, while some requirements are FDA regulated, such as the testing done for shipping containers.
So for our rapid prototyping, we will mainly be testing the performance of the device. We chose to use stereolithography to fabricate the plastic parts out of liquid resin and direct metal laser sintering for our titanium base. We considered 2 prototyping approaches for our testing. The first was a multi-test approach in which we tested 5 assembled prototypes in a water bath simulating an in vivo environment. The device can be subjected to forces and temperatures similar to what would be found in the body. We also looked at a single input assessment where we'll test each part in isolation under relevant conditions for each input. We determined R&D testing was sufficient for the prototype, where we can carry out some full testing procedures, while others might need to be abbreviated, like accelerated aging, in which we can do in an oven with humidity.
Around the same time, we were also formulating a testing plan. Pre-verification testing will be conducted to test the technical feasibility of the product. The sample size would be much lower, around 5 units, and the outputs tested would be mainly the physical parameters, just to make sure that our concept would work functionally before it's been fine-tuned. From here, we'd roll into a verification plan, which would test whether the design inputs meet our specified design outputs. The sample size for this would be around 30 to be statistically significant in our results, and almost all of the outputs would be tested with the exception of user testing because this wouldn't be in a production scale setting. Finally, we would complete validation testing on production scale models to determine if the design outputs meet the user needs. For this, we would use clinical and use studies, and the sample size would be between 15 and 30 depending on how many physicians we could get to participate, if we can get animal trials, and such. And the outputs tested here would primarily be user testing just to ensure that all of the user needs are being met.
So when designing the product, we focus on designing it for ease of manufacturing and ease of assembly. And we broke this down by component in order to have a more effective analysis of the engineering consideration. So for the titanium port, we decided on an equilateral triangle because it is a fairly simple shape, and the one point would allow it to be slid into place in insertion into the patient. We chose a sloping internal chamber so that it would be able to effectively deliver the drugs. And while it is a complex internal geometry, we decided to outsource to Tiger Medical in order to be CNC machined, which would be fairly easy for them to do. In order to validate that this met our specifications, we would inspect 100% of the first 5 lots and monitor subsequent lots for NCMR issues after. For the catheter, we were deciding between doing an open end and a closed end with a valve, and we decided on the open end because it would be easier to manufacture and chose Biomerix as our supplier for their extruded polyurethane tubing. In order to validate this component, we would inspect 25% from the first 5 lots and monitor 10 per 100 of the subsequent lots for NCMR issues. For the fastener, we chose to have a plastic part that would be supplied by Crafttech. While this does add another step to manufacturing, it would make assembly easier to attach the titanium port and the catheter. This would be a somewhat difficult part to manufacture because it would have to fit well with the different dimensions of the titanium port and the catheter. So we would have very specific specifications that we would provide to Crafttech, and they would make the part by injection molding, and we would inspect the first 50% of the first 5 lots and monitor 10 per 100 of subsequent lots for NCMR issues. For the rubber septum, we would require small palpation bumps in order for the user to identify it in the body, and a press-fit seal in the titanium base. These are fairly specific components that we would have to specify, and we chose Pauling Engineered Products because of their expertise in rubber manufacturing. In order to validate this part, we would inspect 25% from the first 5 lots and monitor 10 per 100 subsequent lots for NCMR issues. We chose sutures over staples because of background research, identifying that they work better and that surgeons prefer them. And we chose CQ Medical as our supplier for this part, and they would manufacture it by braiding. And we would inspect 25% of the first 5 lots and monitor 10 per 100 of subsequent lots for NCMR issues.
So as Erin mentioned, there were quite a few different DFM and DFA concerns. These all fed into our supply chain FMEA. All of the team members did research on a different component of the design, and we chose the supplier that had the best controls for the devices, depending on the custom or regular fabricated part. We also listed recommended actions that Erin already went over. The custom part specifications are a little bit more thorough to make sure that they're being checked more regularly, whereas the regularly fabricated parts, we have an assumption that the company is already producing them to a good standard, but we're going to continuously monitor for NCMR issues. So as far as our design plan moving forward, we wanted to give a brief overview of the documentation and the revision status, the project overview, quality plan, and project team. The initial version that was drafted is still applicable because these aspects have not changed. The design and development approach has gone under secondary revisions, which have been completed and approved by all members of the team. The project timing has been adjusted to reflect accurate Phase 3 goals and has also been approved by the team. Risk management has been the primary goal of Phase 2, and their first vision has been completed and team approval follows this meeting. The design verification validation plans have the first revisions completed but is awaiting team edits as we move into Phase 3. And the manufacturing process has a basic plan draft, but the initial revision is set for Phase 3 as well.
So moving on, we're going to cover the status of the deliverables for Phase 2.
So first we wanted to evaluate the different hazards which may be present in our design. We looked at the hazard ID checklist and found that we had issues with energy, biological and chemical hazards, operational hazards, as well as information hazards. With regards to energy hazards, our primary focus is going to be on radiation, with residues resulting from EO sterilization, as well as mechanical forces from suspending the port to muscles in the subclavian space, as well as pressure from the high pressure of the fluid injections. From biological and chemical hazards, this primarily relates to a breach of the sterile barrier and could result in biological contamination, such as bacteria, viruses, or infection, as well as chemical contaminants or residual EO sterilization, which may result in an immune response, as well as biocompatibility, which may result from an allergy to either titanium or polyurethane in the product. As far as operational hazards, these primarily relate to either user error or a loss of function. So if our device is not able to sustain the function over the timeline that we have projected in the manual, or if we do not properly train the physicians to use the device, then we could have some potential user error. Finally, there may be information hazards resulting from incorrect labeling or operating warnings, which may result in patient complications from physicians not using the device as it is intended, which could cause serious complications down the line.
So then we did a hazard ID and risk analysis. We identified each hazard with a specific hazard ID. We also identified the source of the hazard, as well as the normal and fault conditions of each hazard and the consequences of each hazard. And then we analyzed the severity and probability of each hazard. The way we determine severity is that a 2 meant that it wouldn't cause any serious effect to anyone, whereas a 10 would result in a catastrophic effect leading to for death, for example. And then for probability, a 2 meant that the event would highly unlikely occur, whereas a 10 meant that the event would likely occurred. And then we analyze each risk by using bar, AFAP, or INT. A bar meant that the score was a 4 to a 12. A AFARP was a 16 to a 36, and INT was anything 40 or above.
So in our DFMEA table, we looked at the failure modes of our components and their design. Since our FMEA tables are pretty extensive, the one pictured here and the subsequent tables only highlight a few of our failure modes. We looked at the cause of failure, failure mode, effect of that failure, who is affected, and rated the severity and probability of occurrence, and then determined the risk levels, as Justin had mentioned. Since the assembly is implanted, we determined all failure modes should be mitigated as far as possible. Failures that could cause harm or hinder performance were considered intolerable. For example, the suture tensile failure is improbable but could lead to catheter or port migration, so we want to mitigate that as far as possible. But then something like catheter kinking or luminal narrowing could completely obstruct the pathway, which is intolerable as it would negate the device's entire purpose. Also, what's not shown here is our residual risk analysis, which was on page 2 of our FMEA tables.
So then we did a U or AFMEA analysis, which looks at the failure modes from a user standpoint. From this, many of the failures occur within the patient. For example, if the sutures aren't implemented incorrectly, the sutures won't be attached to the port, and the sutures could be dangling from the port. Also, if the port isn't flushed correctly or not on a regular basis, it could lead to potential death of the patient due to blood clots building up in the veins.
For the PFMEA, we looked at different failures that could occur as a result of issues in the manufacturing of the device. This list is not extensive, but highlights some key points. So an example would be if in the packaging, a failure could be if the package wasn't fully sealed, which would result in contamination. The effect with that could cause infection if implanted in the body, so the part has to be scrapped, and the patient and the device company are affected by this.
So based on all of this information and following ISO 14971, the update from 2012, we developed a risk management plan and a risk management report. The risk management plan discusses our systemic risk management approach, including the documentation as well as applicable ISO standards that needed to be followed. It reviews the generated hazards from our device, so things that were caused based on risk controls that we put into place, and it details the post-production risk reporting processes, since the risk management process is continuously evolving and must be reevaluated even after the device is on the market. The risk management report summarizes the result of our hazard and risk analyses and the subsequent generated risks and residual risks associated with these. It details the residual risks that were evaluated in all of our FMEAs and talks about the cost-benefit analyses. So the status of both of these documents is that they are tentatively completed. At this time, risks have been found to be as low as possible and outweighed by the benefits of the device. We will be reviewing this continually to ensure that the device continues to have compliance to ISO 14971. So through phase 2, the design has been found to meet all the requirements and specifications as designated by the customer and by quality standards, in particular ISO 14971. Moving forward, we're going to discuss our quality plan for responsibilities. So each member of the team has participated in the hazard and risk analysis procedure as outlined in the risk management plan and report, so that everyone can have input on different ways to mitigate the risks. Every member has also reviewed and approved by a signature and date the aforementioned documents necessary to complete this phase.
So while designing the implant board, there were many standards that the team had to follow. One standard pertaining to our device is ISO 10555, which focuses on the regulations of usage of catheters in the intravascular system, since the port that we are designed to do is delivering medication through the catheter and to the subclavian, which is the artery or vein connecting to the neck and arm on both the left and the right side of the body.
In terms of scope changes for our project, there are none at this time. Next, we're going to talk about our design plan and project schedule. So the design plan and project schedule has been updated to more accurately reflect what has been done in phase 2 versus what we completed in phase 3 going forward. Phase 2 now consists fully of the risk management file and all of the subsequent documents inside of that, while all master validation plan, flowchart, different manufacturing procedures and routers, the mock time study, and COGS have all been moved into phase 3, design verification and validation. In terms of the status of the DHF, it is being compiled electronically. All team members need to sign and date the files once they have approved new changes. And the different revision methods that we've been using is AA, AB, AC, and so on for the different documentation. So as far as documents that have had to undergo revisions, there are 4 main ones. The rest are still in their original form. The first is the project plan or Gantt chart, as was shown previously. The second version of this one more accurately shows what was completed in phase 2, which will be completed in phase 3 moving forward. The brainstorming and down selection has been revised in order to more accurately document the process. The design plan has been updated 2 times since its original inception. The first update involved providing more detail to the design verification and validation plans, as well as to the design development approach. The most recent revision of the design plan involved updates to the project plan to reflect the Gantt chart, as was mentioned previously, further description of the risk management plan in lieu of what was completed in phase 2 of our design, as well as further detail being provided about the materials used for our device and the different suppliers that would be used to acquire those materials. Lastly, the custom parts design drawings have been updated to include their tolerances. In terms of other concerns, at this point, we don't see any others in the design that need to be addressed. Moving on, we're going to look at the action item log going forward into phase 3. Into phase 3, there are 17 different action items. The responsible parties for each of these action items are going to spearhead the effort of these different files, as well as have final edits. However, all team members are going to be participating in each part of these different action items, and the responsible people have been determined based off of their role in the team. Lastly, we're going to go over the attendance at this meeting. All 5 team members, including the project manager, technical lead, product development engineer, quality engineer, and manufacturing engineer are present. In a professional setting, an independent reviewer who is knowledgeable but not directly involved in the design project would have to be present, but for this project, that's not necessary. Thank you for your time.